The rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Liam Carter's New York apartment, blurring the city into streaks of neon. Outside, Times Square glowed with relentless energy. Cars honked, and streetlights flickered like restless eyes. Inside, however, silence pressed against Liam's chest, heavier than the storm outside. He sat slouched on the edge of his couch, phone in hand, scrolling through messages that made his stomach twist. Sophie. Her name on the screen felt both familiar and foreign, a reminder of years shared and promises made. But tonight, the texts were different. They weren't meant for him. Casual laughter, inside jokes, subtle intimacies meant for another man, Ethan Miller. Liam's pulse quickened, then slowed, caught, somewhere between disbelief and a rising ache in his chest. How long had this been going on? How many nights had her smile belonged to someone else while she told him, "I love you"? The apartment felt suffocating. The furniture, usually comforting in its minimalistic order, now seemed like witnesses, silent and accusing. Liam rubbed his face, eyes narrowing at the messages again. He could almost hear her laughter echoing. Imagine her leaning closer, sharing secrets meant to exclude him. Each notification on his phone was a needle, piercing a fragile veil he had wrapped around his heart. He rose slowly, pacing, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of sirens filling the void. The city outside seemed mocking bright, alive, yet utterly indifferent. Neon reflections danced across the polished wooden floor, colors bleeding like bruises across his consciousness. He ran a hand through his hair, tasting the metallic tang of anger mixed with disbelief. He wanted to scream, to confront her immediately. Urakieter. More insidious thought lingered. Maybe he had always known, in the corner of his mind, that refused to acknowledge reality. A memory flickered Sophie laughing at a rooftop party months ago. Ethan standing too close, their shoulders brushing. That subtle glance that had seemed innocent at the time. Liam had buried it, choosing comfort over suspicion, routine over chaos. Now the truth hovered in front of him like smoke. Sophie had sought something he could not give, or perhaps something he never realized she needed, and that something was Ethan. He sank back onto the couch, phone trembling in his hands. The neon lights outside painted his face in harsh streaks of green and pink, illuminating the faint lines of exhaustion and heartbreak he had long ignored. A sigh escaped him, soft, almost imperceptible, as if admitting to the room, and perhaps to himself, that the life he had trusted, the woman he had loved, might already be gone. For the first time in years, Liam felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest. Betrayal. Not dramatic and loud, but quiet, creeping, undeniable. The city continued its endless pulse, unconcerned with his heartbreak, its glittering surface hiding the shadows beneath. And Liam realized, with a slow, shuddering clarity, that nothing would ever feel the same again. Liam Carter had loved Sophie Bennett for nearly a decade. Their story had begun in a crowded cafe in Soho, the kind of place where baristas scribbled names on paper cups and the scent of espresso lingered in the air like a promise. Liam had been drawn to her laughter first, bright, uncontained, impossible to ignore. Sophie had noticed his quiet intensity, the way he sketched buildings on napkins, every line precise yet brimming with imagination. They fit together then, or so it had seemed, two halves that complemented each other. But over the years, their harmony had eroded. Liam's life revolved around architecture, long nights poring over blueprints, meetings with clients who demanded perfection, and deadlines that stretched like elastic across his shoulders. He thrived in structure, in precision, in creating spaces that reflected order and beauty. Sophie, on the other hand, craved unpredictability, glamorous parties, impromptu trips, the thrill of being seen and admired. She chased it like a second heartbeat. Where Liam found peace in a quiet evening with classical music and a glass of wine, Sophie found it stifling, as if life's colors dimmed indoors. Friends and colleagues only deepened the tension. Unknowingly or indifferently, At gallery openings or rooftop soirees, they whispered about Sophie's charm and social finesse, commenting casually on how lucky Liam was to have her. Yet beneath the compliments lingered a subtle judgment. A high-achieving woman like Sophie belonged to no one entirely, and a man like Liam could never compete with the excitement she sought elsewhere. Social media didn't help. The curated perfection of their peers' lives reminded Liam constantly that appearances mattered more than authenticity. He had learned to smile, to nod, to congratulate, while a quiet pang of insecurity settled in his chest. Even in private, Sophie's dissatisfaction occasionally surfaced, not in words of accusation, but in fleeting glances, sighs half hidden, and the way she lingered over texts from friends and acquaintances. Liam sensed it, sometimes recognized it, but often chose to overlook it, attributing it to stress or momentary boredom. Yet over time, these small fissures grew into unspoken divides, stretching across their shared apartment like invisible walls. The contrast in priorities was stark. Liam devoted himself to creation, permanence, the tangible evidence of effort and discipline. Sophie chased experiences, validation, and the intoxicating pulse of attention. And while they both loved each other, love alone could not bridge the gap between ambition and desire, security and thrill. Their relationship had become a delicate dance of compromise, a performance dictated by societal expectations and private discontent. Looking back, Liam could see now that the warning signs had been there all along. The laughter that once drew him to her sometimes felt performative. The late-night parties she attended without him, the casual mentions of men from work, the way she sometimes stared at him with an expression that seemed more curiosity than affection, all had been subtle hints, threads of a truth he had refused to untangle. And yet, despite all the small alarms, he had chosen to believe in what they had built together, a life of shared history, memories, and promises whispered in the quiet of a crowded city. But the texts he had read that rainy night shattered that illusion. The decade-long romance, with all its laughter, ambition, and compromises, now seemed suspended between memory and betrayal. Liam understood, in a raw, aching clarity, that Sophie's dissatisfaction had been a shadow in their life from the beginning. A shadow that had finally stepped into the light. The mornings had started to feel hollow. Liam would wake to an empty apartment, the lingering scent of Sophie's perfume, faint, yet suffocating, as if it mocked him for sleeping through her absence. Calls went unanswered. Texts returned hours later with vague excuses. Late meeting, long day, work dinner. But the weight behind the words was never in the content. It was in the hesitation, the subtle pause before she hit send, as though every letter might betray her. Ethan's presence began to creep into Liam's life with unnerving regularity. He would appear in Sophie's stories, tagged in photos on social media with her laughing, arms brushing his casually. In a familiarity Liam wasn't permitted. At a work event, Liam had caught them standing too close in the corner of the gallery, Ethan's hand lingering near her elbow, Sophie's laugh sharp and knowing, a small smile, barely noticeable, passed between them enough to twist something in Liam's chest. He questioned himself constantly. Was he overreacting? Was his insecurity poisoning what remained of their bond? His reflection in the mirror offered no answers, only the faint shadows of exhaustion under his eyes, and a tightening in his jaw he couldn't shake. The life he had built felt like sand slipping through his fingers, each grain a memory now tinged with suspicion. Sophie, ever subtle, never gave him evidence to confront. She leaned into charm, into innocent intimacy with Liam that felt rehearsed, almost like a veil, a touch on his shoulder, a whispered apology for being busy, a glance full of warmth that felt calculated, each act both soothing and infuriating. She had mastered the art of ambiguity, leaving Liam suspended between trust and doubt, craving certainty while doubting his own instincts. At night, he would sit in the dim glow of their apartment, replaying conversations, rereading messages, dissecting every word, every pause. Ethan's name echoed in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't ignore. He hated the way his heart leapt when he imagined Sophie with someone else, hated himself for needing her still. Despite the gnawing suspicion, work offered no respite. Liam found himself distracted, sketching buildings with lines that trembled, as though reflecting the instability of his life. Colleagues noticed a quiet edge in his demeanor, a tension in his posture. Social obligations became tests he feared to fail. Dinners, parties, even simple coffee meetings with Sophie now carried the weight of hidden truths. The more Liam watched, the more subtle cues of Sophie's divided attention stacked like dominoes, teetering on the edge of collapse. And yet, every time he confronted himself with the possibility of betrayal, a part of him refused to acknowledge it fully. To admit it would be to shatter the world they had built, a world that had once seemed perfect in its imperfection. But the dissonance was undeniable. Something was shifting, a slow, inexorable drift that no rationalization could bridge. Liam felt it in his chest, a quiet dread growing heavier each day. The foundation of his life with Sophie was cracking, and when it broke, there would be no returning to the city they had shared, the dreams they had stitched together, or the trust he had once held sacred. The evening air in New York carried a chill, as if the city itself sensed the tension about to unfold. Liam's apartment felt smaller tonight, oppressive in its familiarity. Sophie had returned from a late meeting, her coat slightly rumpled, perfume lingering faintly in the air. Liam didn't greet her with warmth. He didn't even look up. Instead, he held a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. One he hadn't dared open until this very moment. "I found this," he said quietly. Voice doux. His fingers trembled as he placed it between them. Sophie's eyes flickered surprise, appréhension, and then something almost like guilt. But she didn't speak immediately. She only tilted her head, lips pressed together, waiting. Inside the envelope were letters, handwritten notes with familiar handwriting that was not hers. Phrases meant for another, intimate and tender. Signed E. The messages were small, secret, confessional. "I can't stop thinking about you. Tonight, I wanted to be close to you. You make me feel alive in ways no one else can." Each line was a stab, unrelenting and deliberate. Liam read them twice, then 3 times. Unable to escape the weight of their truth, anger surged first, hot and blinding. He wanted to throw the letters across the room, to tear them to pieces, to scream at Sophie until the walls shook. But the anger quickly dissolved into disbelief, and disbelief into a hollow, gnawing ache. This was beyond flirtation, beyond casual secrecy. This was a hidden world, carefully curated and maintained at his expense. Sophie finally spoke, voice soft yet firm. "Liam, I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. I didn't want to hurt you." Her gaze searched his face, perhaps for understanding, perhaps for forgiveness, but Liam could see the truth in her eyes. She had allowed herself to feel something for Ethan, and now the revelation was irrevocable. He paced, hands running through his hair, mind spinning with the memories of the past months. Every missed dinner, every whispered excuse, every late-night text now made sense in its cruel clarity. He remembered laughing with her on the rooftop, holding her hand as the city stretched beneath them. He remembered trusting her implicitly, believing in the life they had built together. And now it all felt like a mirage, beautiful but ultimately unreal. The room felt colder as Liam sat heavily on the couch, envelope clutched in his hands. Sophie sat across from him, silent, her own eyes glossy with unshed tears. The city outside roared on, indifferent to the unraveling inside this small apartment. Liam wrestled with his own denial, wondering how he had ignored the signs, how he had excused the gaps and silences. And yet, the betrayal was not just hers, it was a fracture in his own willingness to see clearly. Finally, he spoke, voice low but steady, trembling only slightly. How long? Sophie hesitated. A pause, heavy with implication, then whispered, "Since last spring." The words landed like stones in his chest. Months of hidden moments, of shared laughter and private memories. now tainted with deceit. Liam stood abruptly, the letters fluttering like wounded birds on the floor. I can't pretend this isn't happening, he said, almost to himself. Sophie reached for his hand, but he recoiled, not in anger, but in the ache of a heart betrayed. For the first time, he saw the full picture, and it was not what he had imagined. Their life together, once vivid and comforting, was fractured beyond repair. In that quiet, dimly lit apartment, the turning point was absolute. Liam felt the weight of betrayal, disbelief, and heartbreak converge. He realized that the life he had trusted, the woman he had loved, and the future he had envisioned were now illusions, shattered by secrets he could no longer ignore. And as he stared at Sophie, silent tears glimmering in her eyes, he understood something. He could not unlearn. The path forward would require him to choose himself, even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. The apartment felt suffocating tonight, the city's neon lights cutting through the curtains like shards of glass. Liam paced the hardwood floor, every step echoing in the emptiness. A mirror to the storm inside him, Sophie leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms folded, jaw tight, eyes defiant yet anxious. The letters were scattered between them, fragments of a life now irreparably broken. I can't do this anymore. Liam, Sophie said finally, voice breaking but firm. I can't pretend. I don't want to lose what I feel with him. Her words were deliberate, almost cruel in their clarity. The confession hung between them like smoke, thick and choking. Liam froze, chest tightening. The air caught in his lungs. What do you mean? You don't want to lose what you feel with him? His voice was low, taut with disbelief. Every word, a thread, holding back a scream. Sophie didn't flinch. She met his gaze, unwavering. I'm in love with Ethan. I thought I could. I don't know. Keep it hidden. Keep us intact. But I can't. I won't lie anymore. The room tilted. For a moment, Liam felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him, leaving only the weight of years of trust collapsing into dust. His world, everything he had believed, everything he had fought to preserve, crumbled silently. No shouting, no slamming doors, only the quiet devastation of absolute truth. I gave you everything, Liam whispered, voice barely audible. I trusted you with my life, with my heart. And you chose him. His hands clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. But still, he remained contained, a storm barely held in check. Sophie's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. But she didn't apologize. I didn't plan for this to hurt you, she said. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't fight what I feel. Anger, disbelief, grief all surged through Liam at once. He could feel it in every fiber of his body, a tidal wave of betrayal crashing over him, leaving him trembling. Breathless, he wanted to scream, to strike, to tear something apart. But instead, he felt hollow, a slow-burning ache that spread through his chest, consuming him from the inside. Do you even hear yourself? He asked finally, voice steadier now. Though the tremor lingered, you're telling me you've been everything, all these months, hiding this from me. And you expect me to what? Understand? Sophie's gaze dropped, the armor of defiance cracking, but even in her faltering, there was no turning back. Liam sank into the couch, letters clutched in trembling hands. Every word she had written, every secret message, replayed in his mind with cruel precision. The memories of laughter, of late-night talks, of plans whispered in the dark, all tainted, their warmth replaced by the cold, unyielding weight of truth. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full spectrum of betrayal, not just the act, but the subtle manipulation, the omissions, the gentle reassurances that had disguised deceit. And yet, beneath the devastation, beneath the heartbreak, a quiet clarity began to form, the realization that love alone could not save a bond fractured by desire and dishonesty. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city noise. Liam's mind raced, sifting through pain and betrayal, anger and grief. Until he understood something essential, Sophie had made her choice, and now, the only choice left for him was his own. Whether to cling to a life that no longer existed or to step into a future he would define, unbound by her decisions. As he looked at her, fragile and defiant, he felt the apex of his emotional storm, a combination of sorrow, disillusionment, and the first flicker of resolve. The climax was not a scream, nor a door slammed. It was quiet, devastating, internal. Liam's heart was breaking. Yes, but within that fracture, a seed of self-preservation and clarity took root, hinting at the path he would soon have to walk alone. The cab ride to JFK was quiet, the city lights blurring into streaks against the rain-slicked windows. Liam sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap, the weight of the past weeks pressing down. Like concrete, the apartment he had called home for years, once warm with shared memories, now seemed alien in its emptiness. Every familiar corner, every photograph on the wall, whispered reminders of trust betrayed. In the back of the cab, he opened his suitcase, carefully folding shirts and jackets, as if trying to put some sense of order into a life suddenly chaotic. The envelope with Sophie's letters remained on top, a painful relic he could not yet bring himself to discard. He had read them one last time that morning, tracing the lines with trembling fingers, absorbing every word, every subtle declaration of love meant for another. Sophie had barely spoken when he left. She had begged, pleaded, her voice tight with desperation. But Liam had made no promises, offered no reassurances. Her tears glistened in the dim light, her reflection distorted in the window, a fragile shadow of the woman he had once loved. He remembered the words she had whispered, "I need you. Liam, don't go." But going was the only path that made sense. Now distance was the only salve he could allow himself. As the cab merged onto the highway, Liam's mind replayed the months of subtle betrayals and quiet manipulations. He remembered her laughter at parties, the closeness with Ethan he had ignored, the hidden texts, the excuses that always felt slightly off. And now, he recognized the patterns he had once dismissed Sophie's search for excitement. The gaps in her attention, the charming avoidance of difficult conversations, it had all been leading here, to this moment of irrevocable choice. The flight to Chicago was long and unbroken. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers asleep or lost in their own worlds. Liam stared at the city below, the grid of streets and glowing towers shrinking into night. His heart ached with grief. Yes, but also pulsed with something unfamiliar. The first flicker of liberation. Leaving was not an act of surrender, it was an assertion of self, a reclamation of the life he could still shape on his own terms. Chicago greeted him with gray skies and the low hum of urban life. He rented a small apartment in the Loop, furnished sparsely, almost clinically, as if the simplicity of the space could help untangle the chaos in his mind. Work offered distraction, a focus he could pour himself into drafting blueprints, meeting clients, tracing lines that could be controlled, unlike the tangled web of emotions he had left behind. But even in quiet moments, grief surfaced unexpectedly. The smell of coffee in the morning reminded him of Sophie's laughter. A street musician's song echoed the rhythm of their shared past. His solitude was a double-edged sword. Painful, yes, but also clarifying. He allowed himself to feel anger, betrayal, longing, but without surrendering to it. Each day became a measured exercise in remembering who he was beyond her, beyond their life together. Sophie, left in New York, confronted her own aftermath. Her apartment was silent now, filled only with the echo of her choices. Friends and acquaintances noticed her withdrawn demeanor, the sudden absence of warmth in her interactions. She realized, slowly and painfully, that she had sacrificed stability, trust, and love for a desire that could not sustain her in the long term. The consequences of her pursuit were stark loneliness, guilt, and the bitter awareness of what she had lost. For Liam, the first steps toward healing were subtle. Morning runs along the river, cups of black coffee at empty cafes, long nights sketching buildings with precision, small routines that reminded him he could exist, breathe, and create without her. The letters remain in a drawer, unopened most days, a silent testament to the past he could acknowledge without letting it define him. As weeks passed, Liam felt the first tentative stirrings of freedom. The heartbreak was still there, persistent, like a shadow, but it no longer dictated his every thought. He had chosen distance, yes, but also self-preservation. And in that choice, he began to recognize a strength he had not known he possessed. The city around him pulsed with life, indifferent and infinite, and for the first time in months, he felt a quiet, enduring possibility that he could survive this, and perhaps, eventually, thrive. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and worn leather, a quiet refuge from the bustling streets of Chicago. Liam sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching the rain streak the windows in vertical lines. Months had passed since he left New York, but the ache of betrayal had never fully faded. It lingered like a shadow at the edge of his consciousness. He had learned to live with it, to manage it, and to find solace in the quiet routines he had carved for himself. When Sophie entered, the air shifted. She looked smaller than he remembered, vulnerability clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair was pulled back loosely, eyes rimmed with fatigue and unshed tears. She paused, scanning the room, until her gaze landed on him. For a moment, neither moved. The past stretched between them like an invisible chasm. "Liam," she said softly, voice trembling. I had to find you." She pulled out the chair opposite him, sitting with her hands clasped, knuckles white. "I'm begging you. Please, please come back. You made a mistake. A huge mistake." Liam's eyes didn't leave hers. He studied the subtle quiver of her lips, the way her fingers fidgeted with the napkin, the tension in her shoulders. He felt a mixture of empathy and sadness, but also a hard, steady resolve. The temptation to forgive, to return to the familiarity they had shared, rose like a tide, but he recognized it for what it was: a lure, sweet, but dangerous. "Sophie," he said finally, voice measured, quiet, but firm. "You knew the consequences of what you were doing. I left because I couldn't stay in a life built on betrayal." His words were calm, but beneath them simmered the memory of every letter, every secret meeting, every stolen smile. She swallowed, tears sliding down her cheeks. I know I hurt you, more than I can ever explain. But I've changed. I've realized what I lost. I realize what you mean to me." Liam leaned back, letting the silence settle between them. He thought of New York, the apartment, the skyline, the rain-streaked windows, and of all the nights he had spent questioning himself, wondering if he could have done more. Been more. He thought of Chicago, the sparse apartment, the quiet streets, the small victories of reclaiming himself. "I can hear you," he said finally, "and I understand. But understanding isn't enough." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I've spent months figuring out who I am without you, and I won't give that up, not even for you." Sophie's lips trembled, and a whisper escaped her. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix the past," he said softly. "It doesn't erase the choices made, or the trust broken. I wish it could, but it can't." His gaze drifted to the window, watching the rain blur the city, as if the droplets could wash away memories that refused to fade. She reached out, hesitating, as if to touch his hand. Liam didn't move, though he didn't recoil either. He simply let the moment exist, a fragile acknowledgement of what once was and what could never be again. "Goodbye, Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking. She rose, leaving a space filled with absence and unspoken words. Liam watched her leave, chest tight but steady, Feeling the finality of the choice he had made, the confrontation was over, not with shouting or rage, but with the quiet, devastating recognition that love alone could not heal every wound. And as he sat there, alone with the rain and the city beyond the glass, Liam felt something rare and fragile, the solid, unshakable strength of self-respect. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal and confession, he understood the truth of his own freedom. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Liam's Chicago apartment, soft and unassuming, painting the room in muted gold. For the first time in months, he sat at the small kitchen table without tension, nodding his shoulders or grief pressing on his chest. The city outside moved on in its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place inside him. Sophie was gone. She had left the city behind, retreating into the consequences of her choices. Liam did not feel triumph over her absence, nor gloating satisfaction. Instead, he felt something subtler, more profound liberation. The freedom to exist without compromise, to breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down, to trust himself and his instincts above the desires and manipulations of another. He poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth as it traveled down his throat. The letters, once a symbol of deceit, now rested in a drawer, contained and acknowledged, but no longer capable of commanding his attention or twisting his emotions. He had survived the unraveling of a life he had believed was unshakable, and in doing so, he discovered a resilience he had not known. He possessed memories of Sophie lingered her laughter, the late-night conversations, the plans they had made, but they no longer carried the sting of betrayal. They were fragments, pieces, of a chapter now closed. He reflected on the journey, the slow, painful realization of deceit, the heartbreak, the self-imposed exile to Chicago, and the months of solitary reflection. Each step had been necessary, each choice deliberate, each moment a reclamation of self. Liam understood. Finally, that love, real love, could not flourish where trust was broken, where desire was divided, where deceit lingered like a shadow. His refusal to return was not cruelty. It was self-respect. It was the recognition that a bond poisoned by betrayal could never nourish a heart willing to be whole. He rose and moved to the window, looking out over the city skyline, feeling the wind tug gently at his coat. Chicago spread before him in quiet determination, a place where he could begin again, unbound by past mistakes, unshadowed by another's choices. There was grief still. Yes, and occasional pangs of longing, but these were natural, human, and contained. They no longer dictated his life. As the day unfolded, Liam embraced the subtle triumph of survival, autonomy, and emotional clarity. He realized that leaving had not been loss, it had been liberation. And in that liberation lay the quiet power of choice, the unshakable foundation of self-respect, and the courage to love oneself even when another fails to honor the heart entrusted to them. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and infinite. Inside, Liam felt ensured, steady, and free. He had left behind not just Sophie, but the toxic bonds of expectation, betrayal, and compromise. In their place rose something fragile, but enduring a life wholly his own, a heart resilient, and the first true taste of peace.